Let's just talk about this week, right? Donald Trump had an absolute love fest with Republican leaders who seem to have forgotten or at least dismissed January 6th. If you remember, after that date, many Republicans openly criticized him, wanted him to go away. I'm looking at you, Mitch McConnell, and Lindsey Graham. But now Donald Trump is back. And he is not just the nominee. He is the party. Can we just start with, let's just talk about that Donald Trump circle of life since Jan 6th and to this week. What's your take?
Well, as someone who talks a lot to business leaders and financial leaders, what I find just stunning is that after saying they would never deal with Donald Trump again, behind the scenes, it's not just the upfront public stuff in Washington, it's about the behind-the-scenes schmoozing you're seeing right now from Wall Street reaching out to Trump. And I was in Asia last week, and again, you can see Asian leaders as well beginning to pivot and adjust themselves to a world where Trump comes back in November.
But is that because you think people, business leaders, for example, are excited to have him back, or they're just bracing themselves and they know they've got a decent chance he's going to be the guy, and they don't want to be on his enemy list?
I feel like business leaders are making they're trying to make a compromise at this time, or trying to figure out where to place their bets. I don't know if on CNBC today, Andrew Ross Sorkin, my colleague, he had spoken to a lot of the people who were in the meeting that Jillian just referenced
at the Business Roundtable
who came out and told Andrew he sounded crazy, he was rambling, this was going to we're going to get more of the same. He wants to cut the corporate tax rate from 21% to 20%.
Of course.
And when many of these companies do not pay tax.
But hold on. Even before the corporate tax cut during the Trump administration, none of them asked for 21%. 28% was their goal. He's going, I'm going to go even lower, and deregulation.
So there's a world in which I think one of the things Andrew said was some of these people were inclined to support him because they're thinking about their pocketbooks more than they're thinking about abortion rights, more than they're thinking about welfare for the country, more than they're thinking about democracy, which is not a surprise. But even they were disturbed by the Trump that they just met.
And so Hayes is jumping out of his seat right now.
The problem that I have with that, Andrew's reporting is so good, but the fact that they are telling him this, not coming out and saying it, coming out on camera and saying, you know what, we just saw the former president, and we have a lot of concerns, actually. The fact that they're saying it quietly, they're making these moves behind closed doors, not being out front with it, I think that is as cowardly as the Republicans in Congress who are willing to stand next to him in order to win, make sure that they're on his good side should he win.
Okay, but this is what's crazy about that to me, that these CEOs, who in theory should be among the most informed people in this country, right? They have thousands and thousands of employees. They run multi-billion-dollar businesses. And somehow they were surprised that Donald Trump made no sense, was meandering, and seemed to be lost. How on earth could they not know that? All you have to do is watch him speak.
His degradation is so because you thought he was at the bottom before, right? You thought there was no lower that he could possibly go than where he's been. And when you watch his speeches, I'm surprised when I watch his speeches because he's always been a rambler. But now he's dug, I thought he was at a concrete floor. He's in China. He's completely gone through the other side, and he looks terrible. It's
but he's up against this whole wall of chatter about Biden looking terrible and Biden rambling as well. And so I think what's happening is a lot of people are screening out and saying, well, they're both sounding really old. And so we will look at the questions of policies and,
And the other thing is that he's been such a bully. And the people who have...
I like that you had to pause and think. He's been such a bully. He's a straight-up bully. Yes.
But I guess what I was wondering whether or not to say the word effective, because it's not just him, it's his allies. Think about everyone in the Republican Party who's opposed him. They have been drummed out so viciously. Liz Cheney, Kinzinger, those folks feels like they're gone.
Or meanly embraced, like Larry Hogan today running for Senate in Maryland. Trump's looking at endorsing him reportedly and trying to bring him in after Hogan said no, justice is working after his conviction, trying to undercut him.
One of Trump's campaign leaders was like, your campaign is over, you're dead, meet Larry Hogan. Now they're realizing maybe not.
I think a lot of business leaders, again, are looking at the fact that Trump is endorsing a number of Republicans who are much more mainstream than in the past and thinking, well, maybe if he can do that, maybe his policies won't be quite so crazy.
Okay, but that's wishful thinking.
I agree.
Because if he really was doing that, he would come right out and say, Nikki Haley's my VP, right? Nikki Haley continues to have support. She was out of the race for 2 months, and still in some of those primary races, she had 20% of the vote. And there are all these people who have this notion that, like, she's this George Bush Republican, and he's not embracing her. He humiliated her over and over again, and she's endorsed him. But I want to go back to the point you made that, well, people are saying Trump might be meandering, but so is Joe Biden. Let's just talk about what we saw happen this week, because the right is manufacturing these stories that they're telling about Joe Biden. We saw it this week, the cropped video from the G7 suggesting, right, that Joe Biden was lost in a field speaking to a paratrooper. It wasn't even true. We actually have a clip that I want to show. Oh, no, you know what? We have a clip of Donald Trump. Sorry. So they were claiming
talking about lost and meandering.
Correct. Me, there you go, me meandering.
Yeah.
So they made up the fact that Joe Biden was lost at the G7, meandering through a field. It wasn't true. That headline made its way to the New York Post, all over right-wing media. It's all over Fox News this morning. Yet none of them were talking about Donald Trump, who earlier this week, I think he was in Vegas, was giving a speech and somehow went so off the rails talking about an electric boat and shark bites.
Yep.
And we do have a clip of this. Watch this.
I say, what would happen if the boat sank from its weight and you're in the boat and you have this tremendously powerful battery and the battery's now underwater and there's a shark that's approximately 10 yards over there. By the way, a lot of shark attacks lately. Do you notice that? A lot of shark. I watched some guys justifying it today. Well, they weren't really that angry. They bit off the young lady's leg because of the fact that they were not hungry, but they misunderstood who she was.
Like, for real, what in the holy hell is he saying? That was unedited, Donald Trump. Yet we keep hearing that Joe Biden, he's feeble. What?
Well, you see, sharks have an electrocurrent sense. I mean, no, absolutely not. That's not what he was talking about.
Alex?
Someone saying that? I mean, like, it sounds like he's high. Genuinely, like, this is something you would hear from like a college freshman who's like, okay, say you're in a boat and that's what you say. And then there's like a battery really far away, and so because the battery's underwater, like the whole ocean is like electrified. And so if you get in, you're gonna like, do you take, except the other side of the boat because it's blocked from the electric current because the boat's so big. So do you jump in and take your chance with the shark or take your chance with the battery? Discuss. Like, it's insane to hear him talk. And by the way, the comparison with Joe Biden is like Trump will offer policy. Like, Joe Biden makes he makes gaffes. Sometimes sometimes he'll stumble. Like, sometimes it's embarrassing, but he's never like.
He also has a lisp.
Yeah, he has a lisp and a stammer.
He has a lisp.
And he's always done that. He's always done that. This isn't new.
Always. I'm saying.
Oh, not a lisp, a stutter.
Yeah, he's a stutter, and he's worked with stutterers, and there are beautiful stories about it. But like, he never promises policy. He never proposes like a new system of governance or offers like a marijuana hypothetical on these, he doesn't go on these insane rants. And so like the equivalency for me is just, it's non-existent.
In some ways, it's a real pity that there isn't as much wall-to-wall coverage of the Trump speeches as there were 4 years ago, because back 4 years ago, people saw him unedited in the raw.
At this point,
But
8 years ago, so I can't
because
count.
he's not the president. So basically, Joe Biden's pushing up against the fact that as president of the United States, he's always going to be monitored by a press corps or press pool, and everything he says is publicized. Donald Trump has the huge advantage of being able to pop up whenever he wants, throw out a couple of shark questions, and then disappear, which Joe Biden can't do. So
and the networks aren't covering it the way they were before, so you don't see this.
But we criticize networks for not covering him as much.
Yeah.
And then it was the reverse before of why are you giving Donald Trump wall-to-wall coverage?
I mean,
he's the one who believes all
he was
presidents.
the president of the United States. We did do it then.
Yeah, and I think that 2016, he was new, he was novel, but he was also more on point than he is now. So yes, the things he was saying were still kind of rambling and out there, but he had a better grasp of what he was trying to communicate at that time. So it was more dangerous to play him.
There was a type of a negative charisma to it. Like, there was a sort of narrative. It was a manufactured narrative. It was fear-mongering. It was flawed in pretty much every way, ethically, but like, at least he was going somewhere.
Yeah.
And as a comedian who appreciates improvising and riffing, part of me was like, well, this guy's a maniac. And
He's a showman.
He's a showman. He's playing on everybody's fears, and he really understands the fluid dynamics of what makes an audience work. And now I'm just like, he's lost up there. Like, we'll give him the, give him the hook. Like, get him out of here. It's like but I agree. I agree with Katie, because like, there is a sense though that there is still a referendum on whether or not President Biden is is in some way enfeebled, right? And so every possible gaffe that can be shown in a negative or edited light seems somehow newsworthy. If you were like, this just in, Trump a lunatic, people would be like, well, yeah, we know. Like,
meanwhile, Trump's birthday, we're recording this. Today's his birthday, I believe, and if he wins, he will become the oldest president in history in the course of his term, and no one is talking about that.
We are right now.
Biden threw some shade at this today, actually, in some of his social media posts, which is actually quite clever, saying, "Well, happy birthday, Donald Trump. We both know what it's like to be old, and age is not a factor. We can get on."
But President Biden will be in Hollywood this weekend for a star-studded fundraiser expected to attend President Obama, George Clooney, Julia Roberts, to name a few. So here's the question. Hollywood stars coming out to support President Biden. Does that move anybody who's on the fence to vote for him or to come out and vote? Or could it actually hurt in some way? Or is all of this just a fundraiser?
I have a thing about this that I've been screaming from the low rooftops for a long
Okay,
time.
make it a big rooftop.
Which is that I don't think people listen to celebrities and who to vote for, but I think, except if you're Taylor Swift, in which case you listen to everybody. Fantastic. But I do think that they will listen to celebrities about issues. I think if a celebrity goes to a state and says, voting rights are really important to me here, clean water is really important to me here, no oil drilling is really important to me here, then I think people listen to celebrities.
In a place that's their home state that they're connected to, like when Charles Barkley went to Alabama, when Judge Roy Moore was running, and Charles Barkley went there and said, do not be a low information voter. You deserve more than this. He had an impact.
I think, sorry.
I was going to say, I think the other big thing is, the biggest risk to my mind in November is people not voting at all. And lots of really disaffected, particularly Gen Z, millennials, who say that we just don't get excited about this. And I think what Taylor Swift is doing right now with her Get Out the Vote campaign, all of her appeals, is actually having an effect. You can see that in terms of people signing up. And so right now, what I think is more important in some ways, what Hollywood does, or at least some of the celebrities do, is just tell people to get to the polls.
I noticed you noticed Gen Z.
Oh, yeah.
I did, too. I was like, oh, my goodness. The sophisticado is here.
When Jay-Z plays in London, they're like, Jay-Z did. We love you.
Exactly. Are you a Gen Z then, or Gen Z?
I'm a millennial. Squarely I'm a millennial.
What do you think about this?
I think that I agree that on issues it is important. I don't think that many people. I think that also celebrities tend to try to play the field a little bit, not as much as business leaders, but they do want to be semi-nonpartisan. They'll go out for Democratic fundraisers. They'll say, go out and vote, register to vote, without telling people specifically who to vote for. I think that the money, but people know, I do think that the money being raised is more important in this case, especially since right now the Biden campaign Democrats do have a fundraising lead over Republicans, but given the haul that came in right after Trump's conviction, that's something that they want.
Let me be clear.
Is wild.
But it's also most likely designed and timed. Donald Trump needed a really positive headline after the conviction, and we'd be fools to think that that wasn't orchestrated. That the next day he could say, "And look what I just."
Oh, absolutely. They had that fundraising email ready to go the second the verdict dropped. It's part of their fundraising strategy to be like, look at how aggrieved I am. Look at how much I am being persecuted. But I think that the fundraiser in Hollywood is important to help keep that going, because I think that the amount of money being spent right now for so many low information voters out there, it is you look at the polls and see how many people are really engaged and paying attention right now. The only way beyond celebrities saying go out and get to the polls to get in front of them is to spend ad dollars right now and to inform them about what is at stake here.
And you need those dollars for down ballot races.
Exactly.
Because we know on the Republican side, it's not going to go there, right?
Yeah.
Laura Trump already said, yep, we're keeping the money. But can we just talk about this hypocrisy? What was it, 2 months ago, when President Biden had the massive fundraiser right across the street at Radio City, and Republicans went after it. The elites, it cost this much money, it's disgusting, it's revolting. Fast forward, They're throwing fundraisers for him in Silicon Valley at 50 grand a clip. They're throwing parties in Palm Beach.
They threw a retaliation fundraiser. He was like, it's going to be twice as big. It's going to be huge. You'll see. It's going to be enormous.
Yeah.
But how do Republicans
raising fundraisers in London, you know?
But how do they balance the two that they will use this weekend and say, look at Joe Biden with Hollywood elite, disgusting. He's not a real man. He's not standing for America. When they're doing the exact same thing with just a different flavor of rich people.
That's such an interesting question because it presupposes that Republicans care about hypocrisy, which I don't think exists anymore. Especially when you look at all the people who've come back to Trump. You know, you had mentioned earlier the big meeting that Trump had on the Hill on Wednesday. He came to Congress and everybody fell in line, even Mitch McConnell.
Who hates him.
They were all there. And so I think that hypocrisy is no longer an issue for the party. But something else is going on. And it's, you know, if you've read Mitt Romney's book, if you talk to Republicans, a lot of them will say it's fear. They don't have a security task. They don't have security. And they understand that Donald Trump's supporters are extremely ardent, but also somewhat violent.
Yes.
As we saw on January 6th, the very event that they're trying to erase. And so there's a lot at stake that's not just supporting Donald Trump for all of these
You
politicians.
saw it with Lindsey Graham.
Yep.
He spoke out against Donald Trump on January 6th that night. I'm done. The next day, he was at Reagan National Airport flying to South Carolina and got all but physically attacked by Trump supporters. A minute later, he is at Mar-a-Lago saying, you've got a perfect handicap, sir.
So can we give another shout out to Liz Cheney?
Yeah.
Always.
She
Always.
is one of the few people who has absolutely been totally consistent all the way through, and boy, has it cost her.
It has. I want to talk about this, though, because celebrities may be coming out for President Biden, but you know who's not? Studios. So there's this movie that's coming out about Donald Trump, The Apprentice, Gabe Sherman, and it's already gotten amazing reviews, but there's a really good chance people don't get to see it. Studios are shying away. They do not want to buy this thing. They don't want to put it out there. What does that say about where we are as a country? Is that not showing that business leaders don't want to get off sides with the next potential president? That feels very Russian of us.
It certainly does, but there's actually a really big shift right now in the whole movie business away from actually having distribution for controversial documentaries and controversial films. So this comes at the end of a big trend we're seeing, which is really scary. And there have been great movies about Russia, about China, about Middle East, which have not been able to be distributed either. So the fact they're running shy of this one is part of a pattern about control.
Absolutely. And that is a problem. And then there's the fear that we've already discussed around politicians, that we've talked about in terms of business leaders. Do you want to get on the wrong side of Donald Trump before
But this is
November?
my point. Doesn't that feel like a mini Russia?
And there is a world in which the election comes and goes, and if Donald Trump were to lose, that the movie would get distribution, because that's the balance. Are we going to be rewarded by Donald Trump because he'll give us all of the business perks we want, or will we be punished by Donald Trump because he actually doesn't believe in the rule of law that allows for business people to succeed? And this is another example of it. Let's see what happens after November.
Okay.